Hey folks, my name is Jay Herrala. I'm a fisheries biologist with the department here. I'm going to be talking to you today about some blue catfish opportunities in Kentucky. I'm going to give everybody just a few seconds to tune in. A little bit about myself. I've been in my current position for about 8 years. Our branch is research-based, so we do a lot of different projects and we work statewide, doing our own work and also helping the districts out. But we are tasked with kind of taking a look at all the streams and rivers throughout the state. So we do a lot of work with catfish in a lot of different parts of the state, but a lot of our work is focused on the Ohio River. Okay, so I want to talk to you today. We'll talk about our three main species, but we'll focus on blue catfish. So for those of you that aren't familiar with catfish, we have several species, but we have three that you're probably a little more familiar with. The first one that we'll be focusing on is the blue catfish. You can see that they get quite big. This here is actually our state record that was caught in 2018. I believe it was just shy of 107 pounds. And it was actually caught in a tournament, so it made a nice payday for him. We also have the channel catfish, which a lot of people are probably more familiar with. Doesn't get quite as big, but still can get to decent sizes and are pretty fun to catch. And the last one that a lot of people have probably heard about is the flathead catfish. It's quite a bit different than the other two I described. It is a little bit different in color, and as you can see here and up on the screen here, it gets its name from the shape and size of its head. They also get quite big and can be found across the state as well. A lot of people, especially when these fish are small, have trouble telling the blue catfish and the channel catfish apart. So for those of you that are just getting started into this, I want to give you a little idea on how to tell them apart. A lot of people think that a blue catfish can be distinguished just by its color. That's not always the case. Blue catfish, if we look up here at the screen, oftentimes they will be a blue to grayish tint. The channel catfish, if it has a similar color, a lot of times, especially on smaller fish, it may have some spots on the side of it that'll help distinguish it. But in my opinion, the best way to tell them apart, if you're really not sure, is to look at this fin right here. This is called the anal fin, and it's found on the bottom of the fish, just in front of the tail fin on catfish. On a blue catfish, this bottom edge right here will be pretty straight or a flat line almost. On a channel cat, it'll be much more rounded. And if we look at these fish right here, you can kind of see that. This is very straight at the bottom on this blue catfish. And on this channel catfish, it's got much more rounded, kind of like a semicircle or a crescent moon shape. Okay. So again, I said I was going to focus on blue catfish. So kind of where can we find them? These fish are native to the Mississippi River drainage, okay? So what that means is pretty much any body of water that has some sort of connection to the Mississippi River, you have a chance of finding these fish. So in Kentucky, that means on our large rivers, that could be the Mississippi, the Ohio River, the Tennessee and Cumberland, Licking River, Kentucky River, Green River, quite a few. We also have some lakes that have natural populations in them. Those are dammed up rivers, so the natural remnants from those are in there. That'd be Lake Barkley, Kentucky Lake, and even a few in Lake Cumberland. Now the department also raises some blue catfish at Pfeiffer Hatchery here in Frankfort. Those get stocked around the state in different areas. We used to stock fin lakes. I don't believe we do anymore with blue catfish. We have a few small state-owned lakes that get stocked every third year, I believe. But our main focus on that are 4 of our Army Corps of Engineer lakes. Those are Taylorsville Lake, Barren River Lake down in Bowling Green, and then out east we have Dewey Lake and Fish Trap Lake. So the great thing about this, between us stocking and then natural populations and the connectivity to our larger rivers, is pretty much anywhere in the state you are probably within 30 minutes to an hour drive of at least having an opportunity to go catch some blue catfish. I'm going to get into fishing methods. With this, I'm really just wanting to scratch the surface. So for those of you that have a lot of experience catfishing, this is not going to be anything new to you. It's going to seem very, very elementary. But for those of you that don't have a lot of experience, or this is something you're wanting to get into and you have no clue, I hope that this is a good primer and will help you out with that. There's a lot of ways that we can catch these fish. We'll focus on rod and reel fishing here in a minute, but if you're wanting to put some fish in the freezer to eat, you have the opportunity as a recreational fisherman to use trot lines. You can use jugs or noodles. If you really want to have some excitement, you can go stick your hand in one of their nests and catch them with your hands. And you're also allowed to bow fish for them. But as I said, we're going to focus on the rod and reel stuff today. And what I've got here is just a very simple setup. When you're going after these fish, you do need something a little more stout because they do get quite big, okay? What I suggest is a rod that's 6.5 to maybe 8 feet long is pretty common in the catfishing world. What I've got right here is a 7-foot medium heavy spinning rod. Okay, it's got a good butt section in it, and it's got a fairly sensitive tip that's going to help with your hook set. Line choice, there's a lot of different options there. You can use monofilament, braided line. There's really not a need for fluorocarbon. If you prefer it, that's fine. But catfish, when they're hunting, they're more of a sensory predator, which means they're smelling, they're sensing different chemicals in the water, and they're feeling with the barbels that are on their face. So you're going to want something that's at least 30 pounds, 30-pound test. You can go much heavier if you want. And I think one of the most important parts of this setup that's become very popular and a very good tool in the past few years is the circle hook. Now what this circle hook is designed for is to help give you a better hook set, and also it eliminates a lot of the gut hooking that used to be very common in catfishing. With this hook, when the fish takes it, will turn and go to the corner of the mouth and give you a nice hook set almost all the time in the corner of the mouth or the top of the mouth. And the way it's designed, very hard for the fish to come off. It will happen sometimes. You will lose a fish, but also very easy to get out once that fish gets into the boat. With this, it's very important to note, if you're using a circle hook, that you do not set the hook. If you're setting the hook with a circle hook, a lot of times you're going to miss that fish. It's just the way the hook works. So if you're using a circle hook, once that fish takes it and you start to feel pressure, simply start reeling. The pressure from you reeling will get that hook into the right spot in the fish's mouth. You're good to go. If you do decide to use more of a traditional hook, a straight shank or O'Shaughnessy hook, then that's when you're going to need to set the hook like you traditionally would with some other fishing techniques. Bait, a pretty hot topic on what's the best bait for catfish. A lot of people that maybe just go fish for channel catfish may say, hey, night crawlers are my favorite, chicken livers are my favorite, chicken soaked in Kool-Aid's my favorite. All those are fine. Blue catfish in particular are fish eaters. They will eat some other stuff, but fish is what they prefer. And there's a lot of different fish that you can use. Here we've got a picture of a bluegill. People use them whole. You can cut them. That's fine. They are legal to use in Kentucky. Then we've got shad, native species, threadfin and gizzard shad. You can freeze these if you get a bunch of them and want to wait till some other time, but fresh bait's probably going to be your best option. Again, you can use these whole if they're small enough, or if you want to catch a really big fish, you can cut them to fit on your hook better. But what a lot of catfishermen, especially guys fishing on the river and the bigger lakes that are going after big fish, what they consider the king of catfish bait is the skipjack. It looks similar to our shad, but it's a very oily fish. Again, it can be cut, used whole, whatever your preference is. And as Asian carp have continued to invade our waterways, fish realize that they are a food source and they will eat them. This is the case with blue catfish. They will eat bighead and silver carp to some extent. So if you get some bow fishing and need catfish bait, or if you have one hop in your boat, feel free to use it as cut bait. They do work. I've used it myself and caught fish on them. So with that being said, if you're going to use Asian carp or any type of shad that you're gathering from a water body yourself, please be aware that you cannot transport live fish from one water body to another in terms of bait. This is because we don't want to accidentally spread these fish to waters they're not. So we don't want people going to the Ohio River, getting a cast net full of what they think are shad, and then coming to use them, say, in Taylorsville Lake, and accidentally releasing one or throwing their bait away at the end of the day. So just be mindful if you're going to use that as bait. So I want to talk about a couple of really simple rigs that, for those of you that aren't familiar with catfishing, can use to get started. Again, the techniques and tactics that have come out and the use of electronics in the past 5 years have been incredible, not just for bass fishing, but for catfishing as well. Things that a handful of years ago I would have said you're crazy if you think you're going to catch catfish that way. Myself and a lot of people would have been proven wrong if we'd have said that. But I'm just going to give you 3 simple rigs that'll help you get started. If you want more, do a quick Google search, look on YouTube. There are a ton of people out there giving a lot of tips and a wealth of knowledge out there that can help you out. So the first one is what a lot of people use for any type of fishing when they're using bait. It's just your traditional bobber rig. You've got your main line coming down, a bobber on there. You can set this at whatever depth you want. The nice thing about this is you do have the ability to fish at multiple depths. So maybe you find the fish are at a certain depth and you could set it there. Below the bobber on the main line, you've got a split shot sinker attached, and at the end you've got your hook tied on there. Okay? The next one is what they call a 3-way rig. There are some different names for this, but what we've got here is a 3-way swivel. Pretty easy to find. Any local tackle store should have them. But you've got your main line coming down to one opening in the swivel. Directly below that on the bottom opening, you'll have a leader, maybe 12 to 18, 20 inches tied on with a weight on there. And then on that middle prong, you'll have another leader about the same length, maybe a little shorter, and your hook tied on. What I really like about this is it gives people that are bank fishing, particularly on the rivers, an opportunity to fish in some current and not just have their bait taken immediately downstream. It also keeps that bait directly off the bottom, where it is a few inches above the bottom. The fish may be able to take it easier, and it's not going to get caught in some of the debris and snags that are on the bottom nearly as easy. One way to make this snag free, if you're familiar with drop shot weights for bass, you can use that on the bottom, and if that lead sinker happens to get snagged, as soon as you put enough pressure on it, that sinker will come free and the whole rig will come back to you. For those of you that are familiar with bass fishing, you probably know the name of this rig, a Carolina rig. In bass fishing, it's used for typically a slow drag across the bottom. It's no different here. It can be fished sitting still. That's fine. It can also be used to drag the bait along the bottom and get fish that are active. But we've got our main line coming down. We'll have a slip sinker of some kind. It could be a barrel swivel. It could be an egg swivel. The main line goes through, and then you've got a barrel swivel. And on the bottom of that barrel swivel, you've got a 12 to 20 or so inch leader tied to your hook with your bait on it. This is going to be fishing on the bottom most of the time, unless you've got a different tactic that you're using from a boat. Okay, but all 3 of these setups, very simple to do, won't cost you much to get started, and have been proven effective in catching catfish. Like I said, there are a ton of other ways to do this. whether you're bank or boat fishing. A simple look online will find you, 50 or so different setups and tactics. Feel free to look at those if you're interested in this, and I encourage you to do so. So that kind of gets us through where you can find these fish and what you need to get them. Again, we're just kind of scraping the surface on this. And lastly, I want to talk about what the department does sampling-wise. As I showed you earlier, we have blue catfish kind of across the state, whether it be natural populations or from populations that the department has started through stocking. So we go out and sample on a lot of these reservoirs and lakes and rivers, and we're doing that to, one, see roughly how many fish are out there, what the size structure looks like, get an idea of how healthy these fish are, whether they're fat or skinny, and that information can then come back and let us know whether the regulations that are in place are sufficient enough, whether we maybe need to amend those, and also we can go out and get angler attitude surveys to see how the anglers feel about the fishery, how many they're actually catching in regards to how many are in there. And that helps us manage the fishery, whether we need to implement new regs, whether the regs are sufficient, or whether we maybe need to stock on top of some stuff. So a few ways we do that. Number one is electrofishing. And unfortunately, it's a little windy and rainy outside, so I couldn't hook the boat up to show you guys like I wanted to. But the way this works is we have a boat and we have a generator in it, and the generator can send electrical pulses into the water. You've probably seen this on Kentucky Afield or maybe some other TV shows before. What this does is it stuns the fish and immobilizes them. Doesn't kill them, but it does immobilize them. They'll float to the surface on a lot of occasions. We can dip them and put them into the live well in our boat. Once we do that, those fish will come back to consciousness in 2 or 3 minutes. We will measure how long those fish are, weigh them to see how heavy they are, and then we take a picture of anything we want to, and it goes back into the water. Okay? That's really effective for getting smaller fish up to, say, 30 to 35-inch fish. So we have to have other ways to sample some of our larger fish and get an idea of how many of them are in there. One way I do that up on the Ohio River is with trotlines. Move this out of the way, Chase. And this is really good. We use this specifically for blue catfish. Really effective in helping us capture some of the larger fish that we knew we were missing with our electrofishing surveys. And how this works is, if I can find the beginning of it, we've got a main line here. Okay, this end will get tied off somewhere on the bank, or maybe just we'll sink it a few feet off the bank. And this main line will then run out with several hooks. We've got 50 on this one, I believe. Each hook is attached to a dropper that is attached to the main line. Those hooks are baited with cut bait, and we will let that sit overnight. The rest of the line will get drug out towards the middle of the river. We'll let that sit overnight, and the next morning, we'll come back and we will do the same thing that we did with electrofishing. We'll pull this line in. We will measure and weigh all the fish that are in the live well, and then they get back, thrown back and go on their merry way. Again, that's a really good way for us to catch big blue catfish on the river systems. Another piece of equipment that we use is gill nets. We only use these to my knowledge right now, would be Taylorsville Lake. And Chase, I don't know if you can pick that netting up or not. Essentially, this is the same stuff that your fishing line is made out of. This is monofilament net. Okay, and this is 5-inch. So what that 5-inch mesh kind of helps us with is we eliminate catching small fish, and we don't catch a whole lot of your sport fish like your bass and crappie. So people that are worried about that, don't be. Typically, gill nets will if you set them at the wrong time of year or you don't tend to them, they can have high fish mortality. Now, the way we get around that is we set them in the wintertime. Catfish are cold-blooded, so they are very lethargic when the water is cold. They don't want to expend a lot of energy. So when they hit that net, they really don't fight too hard. We can come back the next morning, these fish are still in great shape, and we can get them out carefully, measure them, weigh them, put them back in the lake. I believe Kentucky Field actually did do a piece on Taylorsville blue catfish where we were gill netting with the Central District. Feel free to check that out. It's a really, really well put together piece. The last one we use is a hoop net. We use this on the lake sometimes for channel catfish, but on the river, I use a bigger version of what we have here to catch flathead catfish primarily, but we will catch some blue catfish in them as well. And how this works is you set this so that this large end that's open is facing downriver, okay? And in the springtime, when fish are beginning to run upriver looking for a cavity to spawn in, they will swim into this, and it's throated down and funnels down a couple times, and they are not able to get back out. So they think that this is a cavity that they can spawn in. They get in there if they can't get out. But same thing with the other methods. We'll pull this after a night or two, and we will measure the fish, weigh the fish, and then they go back into the river. So just a few ways that we look at things. Those are the main methods that any agency is going to use to look at catfish. They've been proven to be effective, and we continue to use them quite a bit here in the department. So, like I said, guys, that is just really scratching the surface of catfish, especially blue catfish in the state. But I'm happy to answer any questions that we have. How do the taste of the three catfish compare? I would say similar. However, I prefer flathead catfish to any of them. It seems to be a little bit whiter, firmer meat, but that's just my personal preference. What is my favorite method to catch a catfish? Well, my favorite method is to use the shotgun boat, but you guys can't do that. Me personally, if I'm out doing it, I use that ThreeWay rig the handful of times that I go, and it has been effective on that. Best place to catch a catfish in Frankfort or Lexington. If we're just talking catfish in general, you have a lot of options. You've got Fens Lakes there in Lexington, I believe Jacobson and a couple other ones. The Scott County area also has several Fens Lakes. But if you're wanting to look for the bigger blue catfish, Frankfort, the Kentucky River has them. I've seen several fish over 80 pounds come out of different portions of the Kentucky River. And from Frankfort, Taylorsville Lake has blue catfish that isn't too far of a drive from there. Are there catfish in the Salt River, Anderson County? Yes. Above the lake, once you start getting out of the lake influence, you're probably not going to see blue catfish, but there will be channel catfish and flathead catfish potentially up that way. Not sure where exactly you're fishing on Salt River, be it Four Roses area or Harrodsburg area, but those two species should both be in there. From Wiley, how long can blue catfish get? The longest that I've personally seen was just a hair over 60 inches. We've got them in our samples into the mid 50 inches. And what that equates to is the weight will vary just depending on how much they're eating and how old they actually are. But blue catfish can get almost 150 pounds. If I'm correct, I think the world record is 147 pounds. So not sure how long that fish was, but they do get really long.